Hello and welcome back into the podcast. It's Carrie here, and I'm here with my co-host Jen, and we are sort of wrapping up this series on creating a strong health foundation with this episode and the next. And we hope you've enjoyed it. If you're kind of just jumping in for the first time, you might want to go back and listen to all the episodes in this series because they kind of do build on themselves, I think, and they really all go together, obviously. We've been sharing about first the spiritual aspect of health and then emotional, and now we're on the physical. And I'm excited to talk about this one in particular because I've seen it be just really important for my own health and then health with clients. And I think Jen could say the same. But we're going to talk about how to find rest and break the stress cycle. And I think this definitely encompasses the emotional and spiritual aspects too, and just kind of goes along with those. But the thing that I think about first when I just, I guess, just looking back on my own journey, it really does take being actively seeking this. It's not, if you just go the way of the world, it's just not going to lead you in the way of rest and less stress, basically. And so I find myself just constantly praying that the Lord would reveal to me how he wants me to just live my life. And a lot of times it's just so opposite of the way the world tells us to go. And so we hope we can just help you to think differently about this. Maybe, when I first said what we're going to talk about, you're like, well, I just don't have time. I'm just busy. Right. And I get it. Like, we're all busy to a certain extent, and we could argue about who is busier. However, God does call us to this, right? He calls us to this way of life for so many different reasons. And it really does have such a profound effect on our physical health when we do take time to find rest and break the stress cycle. So, Jen, you want to share any thoughts as we kind of kick this off?
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up pretty well. But I think, from personal experience, I didn't realize how much I think we live in that
Yeah,
sympathetic, that fight or flight. And it's not until you do slow down, do you notice even the
that's
health
true.
benefits.
Yeah.
So if you are struggling to, and you're listening to this thinking, there is no time. I promise that there is. And like we said before, it can be something as just doing things more intentionally. I know they talk a lot about mindfulness, but what does that really mean? And that just means like just paying attention to what you're doing at the moment, doing it slower, not being in a hurry. And that has made a real difference for my physical health, for my sleep, for lots of things. So I think just being aware that our body is even in that sympathetic state, is huge. And then having the tools to bring us back into that parasympathetic or that rest stage, I think can be really good. I know a lot of women do use exercise, which we've talked about before. Exercise is great. And we definitely need movement. We just have to be careful that we're not overdoing the movement, because exercise, even though it is good stress, it's still stress. It's what they call eustress or good stress. So on the days that you are super, super stressed, maybe just a long walk would be better than, hitting the hit, or the bar routine. I know a lot of women like those. So I think that is something that, maybe that we can just pay more attention or tune into our body instead of just checking off the list. The exercise, what does my body need? What does my mind need today, where I'm at, right?
Yeah.
And then using things throughout the day. I know, just with my training that I have used a lot of, just herbs, adaptogens that I'll talk about in a second. But even products specifically that have minerals and things that really support the stress response so that you stop the buildup of nervous tension during the day. And that's really important because I don't think a lot of us probably pause midday to sort of give ourselves a brain break,
Mhm.
and, really just rest. In Europe, of course, they take 2 hours off in the middle of the day to eat and to rest. And I
Mm,
think, I don't know why we don't do
I
that,
could
but
get down with that
right?
for sure.
I could too.
Mhm.
Um, but I've used products throughout the day, um, that really help with the buildup of nervous tension, just because that's my tendency, right? To
Mhm.
kind of just get in that sympathetic mode. Um, And I've also used adaptogens. I still use adaptogens to this day. I think they're super, super important because we're talking about stress and we're on the physical. Adaptogens are usually herbs. There are some foods too, herbs that help you just sort of adapt to stress better. It's like when you take adaptogens, it's like putting $1 in the savings bank so that when you are really stressed, you have that energy basically to adapt or to sustain you through the stress. Most of those are pretty popular. Ashwagandha is a big one. I know a lot of women have heard about ashwagandha before. And it's a beautiful herb, especially if, you are immune compromised. It's a really good herb. There's other ones that I like. I take Eleuthero. It's also called Siberian ginseng. Eleuthero is an amazing herb if you're super depleted. So chronic illness, you've been sick for a long time. Eleuthero's a really good one. Rhodiola is another big one that a lot of people hear about. Those are just a couple. And I think that if we can sort of keep ourselves from going into that exhaustion phase of the stress cycle, that would be huge. So there's kind of 3 stages of stress. There's that initial stage where your cortisol and your DHEA, those are your stress handling hormones, they both go up. And it's supposed to be really short term, right, Carrie? Like
Yeah.
you're supposed to, get out of the way of the saber-tooth cider, and then those hormones should sort of stabilize. But what happens is our brain, obviously, as we talked about in the past, can't differentiate between those immediate stress and things like job worries or child worries or financial worries. And so what happens is we stay in that stress response and we get into that phase 2. And that phase 2 is where cortisol DHA starts to drop off. This is where we might notice where our fatigue, our libido is waning. We might feel tired in the morning and then we get our second wind at night. Those are characteristic of that second phase and that general adaptation response. And then the last phase, of course, is where both cortisol and DHA fall on our flat line, and that's the exhaustion phase. That's like your chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia stage.
And that's a really good overview of like if you stay in a stress response for weeks, months, years, that's typically when you get the really extreme burnout. It made me think of something while you were talking about just the fact of backing up just a tiny bit of how we need lots of types of rest, but I would say physical and mental rest are probably the two, that kind of pop in my mind at first. So that's what we're kind of trying to encourage you to do, is not only think about physical rest. Obviously, we get sleep at night. Hopefully you get 7 to 8 hours of sleep at least. But we need mental rest too. And I think that is where we really don't, we know we need physical rest, but we don't really realize how much we need mental rest, because the mental unrest, I should say, is what really puts us into that stress response a lot of the time. And so that was one thing I wanted to mention. And then 2 is just like you said, I think sometimes when we never slow down, we're not really in tune with our body. So we don't really know when we're getting into that, we're going from that parasympathetic rest and digest state to that more sympathetic dominant fight or flight, which is an everyday thing, right? We kind of go in and out of that. We shouldn't stay in that. But I think that's where over the years, I've realized now when I'm going into that, I think that's kind of the goal, is to realize when you're going into that, so that, okay, let's say we're recording this podcast right now, to be talking about these things, our sympathetic nervous system probably is turned on. However,
Right.
when we get off, we need to wind down. We need to not just keep going, especially if, for me, I just want to share, like, I know when my body's going into this like stressful state, a lot of times my neck will start to get tight. Sometimes I can't get a deep breath. Sometimes my ears will even kind of start to tingle, if that makes sense. I think that there's so many different things that you could feel. Maybe it's just that you feel on edge. However, if we stay in that constant state, you don't ever really realize when you're going in and out of it. But the goal is to realize that. And then, maybe it's you do go take, if you can, go take a rest or go take a walk or whatever. Or maybe it's that you don't really have time to do that and you use some tools like Jen mentioned, some herbs, maybe some oils, maybe some breathing, or, we talked about the touch techniques to kind of calm down your nervous system. I just think it's so important that we don't just stay in that state. That's what we're trying to convey to you today. However, you can break up that stress cycle. That is going to help your body to maintain a better balance and to be able to be more adaptive to what happens, day in and day out, which
Yeah.
if, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just going to say, and what happens when we stay in the state of our nervous system is turned on all the time, we just burn through minerals so fast. Our energy starts to wane, exactly what Jen was talking about over time. And that's where you see true burnout, when you're like, I have no energy, I have no sex drive. All these things are happening, but it's really because of staying in this stress cycle for so long. Your body's just like done.
Yeah. And I think most people are in that chronic
Yeah.
sympathetic state, stress state, and they don't even know that they are.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
They
that's
live
what I'm
there.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. They live there. And so I guess what we're trying to convey is just the awareness of, are you rushing around all the time? Is your heart rate higher? Do you feel like do you feel like your mind is racing? Do you feel like you can't keep up? Do you feel overwhelmed? You're probably in that sympathetic state.
Right.
And so, we're talking about doing some of these, just going, the emotional, I think, even though this is in the physical episode, doing the emotional, what's the word?
Work. I mean, kind of
Work,
working through them
right,
versus just stuffing them because you
right,
don't have time.
right. So doing the emotional work, going through the walk, we talk about tapping a lot. Heart math is a beautiful thing we've talked about on here. And then physically using, adaptogenic herbs or minerals. Minerals are key.
Yeah.
They will help because, as Carrie said, you are flying through your minerals when you're in that sympathetic state. And most of us, the season that Carrie and I are in, where you have kids and you're working and, you're busy, you are burning through those minerals at an excessive rate. And that's why we talk at nauseum about minerals, because of how important they are, especially for breaking the stress cycle and helping you to, as we said, adapt and to be able to cope with the stress that you're under.
Right. I mean, okay, nobody's going to not have any stress.
Right.
Please hear us. Some days, some weeks you're going to have more stress than others. Like, it's just the way of, of being a human and living in the world we live in. However, it's important to have tools, and it's important to know your body, right? Like, to understand what's happening. And so I think it's really important to have that educational piece, but also to feel like empowered with the tools, right? We have physical tools, we have emotional tools, we have spiritual tools, and we've talked about all of those. And that's kind of what this whole series is about, right? It's about, like, how do we live the way of that Jesus calls us to live in the world that we live in? And it's encompassed with all three parts, and they all work together. Because the more that you slow down and the more that your body has what it needs, you can think clearer. Like, you can, and that allows you to show up for people better and serve people better, especially those in your own home. Like, it's just important that we, have space for them and have, the bandwidth, if that makes sense.
Right. Right. And we're talking probably mostly about the emotional stress, but I want you to think about the physical stress too, because there are physical stressors, chronic, underlying, subchronic, I should say, underlying infections, food sensitivities, nutrient deficiencies, dehydration, extreme heat and cold, EMFs, radiation. Those are all environmental or physical stressors that we don't think about on a daily basis that we're all affected by.
I mean,
So,
chemicals would be another one. Chemicals or toxins.
Right. Chemicals. Definitely. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably the most pervasive just in our food supply and with our lawns. So those are all physical stressors that we probably don't think about, because a lot of you are like, well, my stress isn't that bad. You're thinking probably emotional stress. Right. So don't forget about the physical stressors, because those are huge.
Yeah, definitely. And they just kind of all work together, and they kind of compound on one another.
Correct.
So it's like, we can't take away all stress in all these forms. It's just like, how do we help our body adapt, and how do we give it what it needs?
Right. That's why it's important. Asking. Right. That's it, why it's important. If, if you are listening and you are thinking like, well, my emotional stress is pretty much under control and but I still feel super stressed.
Mhm.
It could be some of these physical things, and
Yeah.
that's where working with somebody might be helpful. Or at least maybe someone can even just look at kind of a lifestyle thing to see where you might be exposed to some of these, because they do make a difference. But I just wanted to go back, Carrie, you were
Mhm.
talking about doing less in a day. I think that's something, until recently, I think I just overbooked myself. I
Yeah.
expected myself to do too much in one day. And I
Right.
think expecting to do too much in one day is kind of what leads to the burnout. So
Yeah.
maybe for me, making lists and prioritizing what needs to get done and how I feel that day,
Right.
right? Sometimes you have more energy than others. You have
Yeah.
more get up and go, you have more bandwidth, and those days you might be able to accomplish more. But again, just tuning in, as we've talked about so many times.
Yeah.
And if it is a day where you don't feel like you're super energized, it could be the beginning of your cycle where
Yeah.
you don't have the
That's true.
physical energy that you normally would when estrogen's a little bit higher on maybe, day 6 or 6, 7, or 8, 9, 10 of your cycle, where estrogen's starting to peak and you feel,
Yeah.
a little, you're like, I feel like superwoman, those
Mhm.
hormones are kicking in. So
Yeah.
paying attention to where you are in your cycle, I think that's something that could be helpful too. And,
Yeah.
just prioritizing.
For sure. Yeah, that I'm glad you mentioned that because I do think our stress levels change, and then also like we've said about just all the different types of stress, and then we are more prone to being more sensitive to stress in certain times of our cycle, which being a woman is just it's a great thing, but it's just you have to be aware of these things. I think it's just being aware of it. It's not necessarily a negative thing at all. It's
Right.
truly just we're too daggone busy. And that's a choice. And I think that's another thing I just want you to consider. It's maybe you're sitting here thinking, like, I literally don't know when I would fit in anything else. And I think we are giving you things that you can do that don't take really any extra time. It's just intention. However, if you do find yourself constantly just on the road or always doing something, you do have to think like what choices am I making that are leading to that? And we truly do always have a choice. It might be one that we have to maybe it's I don't know, I'm just giving you an example. Maybe it's a job that's just too taxing. That won't change overnight necessarily, but it is something you can work towards and pray about. And I just think sometimes we take what it take we look at our life and just think there's no way things are going to change, but I don't think that's true. I think that's a lie from the enemy, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just looking, the 30,000 view would be to look at, are you overbooked? Are you taking time during the day to kind of slow down and be intentional, looking at your physical stressors, as I mentioned, the nutrient deficiencies, maybe some, chronic underlying infections, dehydration, those are super important, toxins, as Carrie mentioned.
Mhm.
Um, and then, using um, as we mentioned, some physical things that can really help, like adaptogens. There are minerals, certain minerals, and then the emotional things to help also. We talk about tapping and the heart math. So deep breathing and oils, those, even though some of them maybe fall into the emotional, they affect the physical.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, and connecting with people. We forget. I think sometimes, even I forget sometimes during the day, we're so caught up, I think, that we forget to, or we mean to reach out to a friend or, be really intentional about being in community,
Mhm.
but that falls by the wayside because of time. So I
Yeah,
think making time for those conversations with friends or
for
being
sure.
in community can be super important for breaking the stress cycle.
Yeah. And in the next video or podcast episode, wherever you're watching this, we are going to talk about more of the daily choices that come with the physical health. And so I do want to save one technique for that. It's really called the three anchors. It's something that you can kind of just look at your day and see how you can really set yourself up well and make daily choices that support your body and your mind and your spirit. But one thing I wanted to mention before we kind of wrap this up is that I think when you think about breaking the stress cycle and finding rest, you do have to think about it on a daily, weekly, monthly, and even yearly basis. Like there's going to be different types of rest that you might need. I'd think about like on a yearly basis, how important it is to take time off. Obviously we go on vacations, but to be honest, sometimes maybe they're not that relaxing, right? And, you're with
Right.
other people, which is great. I
Right.
really think we need to take time by ourselves. And just whether that's, we go, maybe it's just a Friday that you go, and spend some time doing what you like to do, find things that we like to do and work those into our month. Maybe it is that you need to take a month off work a year. Speaking about, we've talked about this, how I encouraged Jen to take a month off at the end of last year, and it was very hard to get her to do it. But I think that, well, you can speak to this, maybe that's really what helped you to realize how busy you were, is to take that time off. Do you think?
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
You think that you have so many things to do that you have to get done.
Mhm.
And when you slow down and really look at what do I have to do and what I want to do, those are two different things. But
Yeah.
I love that idea, Carrie. I love the idea of taking time off to do things that bring you joy. Again, I think it's something that we forget to do or push to the side because of time.
Yeah.
And I think taking time off to literally just do something you truly enjoy or you've been meaning to do or that you look forward to doing really can break massive stress cycles. So if you've been in a constant stress cycle, go out, take the day off and do something that you absolutely love that brings you joy.
And disconnect from everything. I think that's one of the things that really helped me. Because I took, whenever I told Jen I thought she should take a month off, and God reminded me, you can't tell her to do something that you're not going to do. So I did it too. And I took the whole month off social media, which again, that's more of like a mental, and seeing clients. That really helped me, just to really unplug from everything, because I think in the past I had taken time off, but not from maybe that specifically, or it just maybe looked different. I think it's important to completely unplug. It's like that takes a lot of steps these days. Maybe it didn't, 100 years ago or even 20 years ago, but now it does seem to take more. It just takes more intention, and honestly, it's just a choice. It's always going to be a choice that we have, and we have to plan these things and stick to it, whether it's something that, we're planning to do once a year or once a month or whatever. And it really is a choice every day when you get up. Are you going to walk in the flesh? Are you going to walk in the spirit? Are you going to choose to honor what your body is saying, or are you not going to choose? Are you just going to keep going because your to-do list says one thing, but your body's telling you another thing? So we hope that this is encouraging, because this is just life, right? These are things that are not going to go away. And we've seen it just make a massive difference physically, emotionally, spiritually, with us. And so we hope you're encouraged as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode.